So basically, I'm all that stands between you and an extraordinary evening. But I'm liking all of you, so I'll be very, very brief. What I want to say is one of the great pleasures and honors of my work is to meet and interact with extraordinary people and do some kind of project with them in which I learn something. And we have such a collection, two wonderful scholars and an amazing artist whose work I've followed for a long time and whom I'm so happy to be welcoming here. So Naiza, formal introductions for you will come, but welcome to Harvard, welcome to the Mittal Institute. It's just a pleasure and a delight to have you here. Naiza and I just spent the weekend in New York doing a series of events, and what I want to say is you're in for a treat. So let me just tell you a little bit about what we're here for and what the Mittal Institute is. So I'm with the Mittal Institute. Our mission is to connect Harvard and South Asia. We work across the region through all the borders of the region and the many, many fault lines. And just as in the region at Harvard, there are as many fault lines actually, and we work across all of them. We work across disciplinary boundaries, school boundaries. We work with faculty, students, researchers, staffs from every part of the university: medical school, business school, law school, school of design, divinity school, education school, etc. I've forgotten many others. And the projects we do are in a wide range, from study of ancient and medieval manuscripts to marketplaces in South Asia to religious festivals, partition. We are doing currently the largest project on healthcare ever undertaken in the region. And we've just in the last 2 years launched our climate platform, which is the great crisis facing South Asia and all the world, for which we just put together a conference in New Delhi with 200 scholars from around the world. And we are expanding our climate work to Pakistan and Bangladesh, also from India. So it's a wide range of activity. And one part of what we do, and a very delightful part and a deeply powerful part, is art. Because art is the way in which we are all talking to ourselves. The cultures of South Asia are having a dialogue with their own history and across all of the borders of time and space and culture. And we do a bunch of work in the arts. Gina Kim, whom I'll introduce in a moment, is the director of our arts program. We bring artists here for a year, each year for a residency at Harvard. It's a non-studio residency for a two-way exchange. We are also doing some projects on the ground that have to do with conservation, working with a series of museums in South Asia. And then we recently launched a distinguished art fellowship. Our inaugural artist was Nilima Sheikh, for those of you who know her, an extraordinarily gifted artist from India. And today we're very lucky to have Naiza Khan, another extraordinarily gifted artist who is in the middle of one of the richest artistic conversations with the world that I have come across. Gina Kim, I want to turn this over for her to take over the proceedings. Gina Kim has advised this art program from the beginning and helped shape it. It's made possible through a very generous grant from Deepti Mathur and our arts committee, but it's really under Sneha Shrestha, who's here. Sneha, are you in the room? There you are. Sneha has been the person who's been leading us from within the team, and Gina has been the faculty member who's been working with us to help shape our arts program in its many parts. So I want to, with that brief introduction, simply bring Gina up. Let me give you a brief introduction. I could spend about 10 minutes talking about her list of books and papers and works, but let me just say, Gina Kim is Professor of Indian and South Asian Art here at Harvard. She's also the Director in the Arts at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. As I said, she's also the Director of our arts program. Her research is quite diverse. She explores topics like female patronage of Buddhist art in medieval South Asia, the development of visual vernaculars in Indian manuscript painting, and the complex history of religious sites like Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Her books include Receptacle of the Sacred, Illustrated Manuscripts and the Buddhist Book Cult in South Asia, and also Garland of Visions, Color, Tantra, and a Material History of Indian Painting. Both are available, and I would urge you both to run out and buy them. In addition to that strictly academic work, Gina is working on a project with us and through the National Endowment for Humanities. It's long-standing now. It's called Mapping Color in History. It is an online portal, a searchable open database for existing and future research on pigments. And the heart of it is looking at art objects and identifying the exact formulae for those pigments, which allow us to develop a proper art history and a sociology. And this will be a database open to scholars from all over the world. And we're very happy to be supporting it, especially at this time when the arts need extra support. I just want to say that Gina also co-curated an exhibition on Nepalese Buddhist ritual art and co-edited its catalog, Dharma and Punya, Buddhist Ritual Art of Nepal. So Gina, take it away.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. And as was just introduced, my name is Gina Kim. Thank you for that generous and kind introduction. And I do teach South and Southeast Asian art here in the History of Art and Architecture department here at Harvard. And in my role as a faculty director in the arts at the Mittal Institute, I welcome you all this evening to a special program celebrating the artist Naiza Khan as a distinguished artist fellow at the Mittal Institute. Before I begin, I'd like to also thank the wonderful staff of the Mittal Institute, Sena Shrestha, who really oversees the arts program, and Salman Rafi, Colin Carr, Bettina Weiler, who is taking a lot of pictures and make what we do shine, and of course Hitesh Hati and Tarun Khanna. All of the whole team makes every event possible and programming possible. And special thanks also should go to the Arts Advisory Council at the Mittal Institute, especially the council chair, Dr. Dipti Mathur, who spearheaded, as Hitesh mentioned, and established the Distinguished Artist Fellowship at the Mittal Institute with the inaugural Distinguished Artist Fellow in Nilima Sheikh in 2023 spring. So it's 2 years out that we have our second Distinguished Artist Fellow. And I'd like to extend a warm welcome to the Arts Council members who are here today. I see some of you, so thank you for your generous support. So today's event, we will hear from the artists about 40 minutes, and then will be followed by a discussion with the artists and our distinguished guest, Professor Sonal Kolar. So I'm going to introduce our artists first, and our discussant, Professor Kolar, and then we'll hand it over to Naiza Khan. So Naiza Khan is an internationally acclaimed visual artist who now lives and works between Karachi and London with a studio in both cities, is what I understand. So she received a BA from Ruskin School of Art, University of Oxford, Somerville College in 1990, and an MA from University of Oxford, again, Somerville College in 2017. And she completed her second MA at the Center for Research Architecture, Goldsmith, University of London in 2020. So when the jury panel was considering artists nominated for the Distinguished Artist Fellow program, we had a long list of really prominent artists. And we were impressed by Naiza Khan's multidisciplinary practice that's built on a process of critical research, documentation, and mapping-based exploration. As Hitesh mentioned, I do work on something called mapping color in history. So of course, I was particularly drawn to her work in cartography and mapping. And also, I personally appreciate her artistic sensibility. This vision of the world that she presents to us is so sensitive and caring, and exact and abstract at the same time, which really appeals, at least to me. So that's, I think you will find in her presentation. I hope you see what we all saw in the jury panel. So through a range of media, including drawing, printmaking, archival material, and film, she brings together ideas of embodiment and ecology. So she received, of course, numerous awards and fellowships, including the National Excellence Award at the 8th National Exhibition of Visual Arts, Pakistan, 2003. I'm just mentioning just a few, because if I read So I was like studying the CV and I was like, oh, what can I actually mention? Because there are so many to choose from. So I was like, the Woman of Strength Award, I like to mention that. Like that was from the TV one in Pakistan in 2009. And more recently, or Prince Claus Award from the Prince Claus Fund for Culture and Development in the Netherlands in 2013. Her more recent residencies include the Artist in Residence at the Institute for Comparative Modernities, Cornell University in 2017, and the Artist in Residence for Monsoon Municipalities Project in London in 2021. She had at least 10 solo exhibitions with published catalogs, which is a major achievement, actually, including her Manora field notes for the Pakistan Pavilion at the 58th Venice Biennale. So she represented Pakistan at the 58th Venice Biennale. And she also curated exhibitions, including the one in 2010, The Rising Tide, New Directions in Art from Pakistan, 1990 to 2010, held at the Mohattab Place Museum, Karachi, Pakistan. As a founding member and longtime coordinator of the Vassal Artists Collective in Karachi, Khan has worked to foster art in the city and participated in a series of innovative art projects in partnership with other workshops in the region, such as the Coast International Artists Association, New Delhi, India, the Brito Arts Trust, Dhaka, Bangladesh, the Sutra Art Foundation, Kathmandu, Nepal, and the Tirtha International Artists Collective, Colombo, Sri Lanka. See, she brought all these South Asian countries together under her wings. In addition, she has curated 3 exhibitions of Pakistani contemporary art. So her artwork addresses the legacy of colonial history, critique contemporary crises related to border and migration, and the art's role as a form of resistance, focusing especially on the political role of the female body. So, and we're actually fortunate to have Professor Sonal Kolar join us this evening as our discussant. We will see Liza give a presentation, and then I will invite Professor Kolar up, both of them at the front for conversation. So just brief introduction to Professor Kolar. Sonal Kolar is the W. Norman Brown Associate Professor of South Asian Studies in the Department of the History of Art at the University of Pennsylvania. She's currently actually Hills Bush Fellow in the Humanities at the Radcliffe Institute during her sabbatical in 2024-2025. So we count ourselves lucky that we have this distinguished scholar amongst us. And she specializes in the art of South Asia from the 18th century onward, with particular interest in histories of cosmopolitanism, post-colonial art world, and critical historiographies of art. Drawing on scholarship in anthropology, feminist theory, and post-colonial studies, Professor Kolar's research and teaching interrogate the global turn in art history rather than taking its significance and implications for granted. She is the author of Worldly Affiliations, Artistic Practice, National Identity, and Modernism in India, 1930 to 1990, which won the 2017 Bernard S. Cohn Book Prize of the Association of Asian Studies, and the editor of Old Stacks, New Leaves, The Arts of the Book in South Asia, that came out from the University of Washington Press 2023. And I can tell you, you should go out and buy these books because they are really good. It's just following up Hitesh's plug. And her second book, The Art of Dislocation, Conflict and Collaboration in Contemporary Art from South Asia, is coming out of the University of California Press, and I can't wait to see this book soon. And she's also co-editing the Next Monsoon, Climate Change and Contemporary Cultural Production in South Asia. And I just have to plug one more thing, because this year at Radcliffe, she's working on her 3rd monograph, titled, I don't know, it's a working title, I guess, On Peace in the Land, on art and war in Sri Lanka across the long 20th century, that complicates the notion of post-war art and processes, proposes new ways for understanding the aesthetics and politics of remembrance, recovery, and reconstruction in post-colonial societies. It's really an important research project, and I can't wait to see that come as a book as well. Anyway, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to our distinguished artist fellow, Naiza Khan. Please join me in welcoming Naiza to the podium. Thank you. Sorry. It's not a beer, it's just water.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Hitesh, and the whole Little team. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it's great to see so many friends and artists and thought leaders from Harvard. So I'm really honored to be here. Thank you. I was putting together these slides, and I wanted to show you a lot of work, but tried to limit it to 3 projects that I feel quite passionate about, and so that I can share some ideas that run across issues of land, landscapes, and bodies. I guess this image, in a sense, encapsulates a little bit of what the last 2 years have been for me, traveling between the desert, the ocean, Karachi, Manora Island, and also my studio tucked away in the middle in London, where I've been also producing work. So there have been many, I've been very privileged to be in many sites of exchange, and also just to witness different kinds of landscapes, which I think is always inspiring for most artists, hopefully. So I wanted to show 3 projects that really pull together different threads in my practice, and also talk about the different kinds of geographies we inhabit, but also the kinds of, the ways that we think about mapping and how we create maps. That has been something that comes into my work more and more as I think about ideas of social justice and also environmental justice struggles. So Karachi is a starting point for so much inspiration, and it's not just the physical space of a city, but it's also the kinds of ideas that have really generated out of the port city, but also which mark a lot of my research now as I think back and loop back into things. I think the other thing is, which I think I love, is the fact that the kinds of communities that I've worked with, the artist community, the students, the artisans that I've worked with to collaborate on projects, has also been a really, really important process of learning. And I'll talk about that as we go on. So I had to reshuffle my slides because I'm going to the Peabody Essex on Wednesday. And so I thought I'd bring you into the city through the guts of the whale. And this is a small watercolor drawing, which is called Whale, from, I think, 2015. And it's just, it's a work that, again, brings a very real physical sense of what embodies the whale, but also how I was thinking about the city in certain ways, how I was thinking about this island of Manora, where I worked for about 10 years. I wrote in one of my notes, I think that Manora is like the guts of a whale. It feels like a whale that has been gutted. And this is around the time when this work came out. But I realized after a few years that there were many images of the whale in my work. And I think the first time this came together was through the Sufi tale of Mururio and the Whale, which is a little story I'll tell you, written by Shah Abdul Latif Bhittai, and it's in the epic poem of the Risalo by this Sufi poet. It's basically about, it sort of comes out of the folklore of the islands around the harbor of Karachi, and it talks about this handicapped Mururio who's a fisherman, and he stays at home while his 6 brothers go fishing. One day they're eaten up by a big whale, And Mururio, who is a blacksmith, he sort of builds this giant cage of steel and glass. This is a poem written in the maybe 17th century. So, you know, this idea of a steel cage being lowered into the ocean to pull out the bodies of his brothers as he gets into the belly of the whale, because the whale eats the cage, is sort of cut open by the blades of the cage, and then the bodies of, it's a bit gory and gruesome. Sorry, I'm going into so much detail. But, you know, basically it's about something very, it's about danger that's larger than ourselves, I suppose. It's about how we try and push back and how we salvage. I mean, the idea of salvage is really important, and he pulls out these bodies and gives them a honorable burial. So I found many references to the whale in my work, which I didn't know existed. And through the course of these images, I'll show you some more. This is a much larger work, Whale Under Construction. And I think I started thinking about this idea of under construction, which came out of the notion of living in an urban city where there's constant construction of buildings going on. And you're always seeing the city through these steel grids, scaffolding, you know, bits of cloth hanging and falling off, and of course all the labor that has to work in all kinds of difficult conditions. So I guess this idea of under construction has been more, again, a kind of conceptual tool to unpack the physical sense of a whale or the ocean or a building, but it's also been about how to just open up questions, really, because something that's under construction isn't quite finished. It's still in the process of becoming something. So I think this under construction suffix, prefix becomes that kind of way of opening spaces, questioning spaces, and creating possibilities. I'm going to run through, you know, a couple of large works, because I haven't really shown all of these paintings together anywhere, and they're quite large format oil paintings, which all address my desire to make sense of the space that I was living in. I moved to Karachi in 1990, and have had a studio there since the last 34 years. And so this time of flux and change, and you know, the sort of energy of the city really has been a center of gravity for many of the images that I've created. Another whale, which was beached in Karachi Harbour in 2012, about 40 feet long. This was a whale shark, weighing about 6 to 7 tons. And so it was hauled into the harbour. And, you know, this image again feels quite surreal and mythical. And that's actually what I find very interesting about images, making images, is that, you know, I think we find everything in reality that we are trying to talk about through our imagination. And it's moments like these when you actually find something which is quite surreal. And then, you know, you start to, as an artist, I start to process it through my work. I'm not just going to talk about the whale, I promise, but in the top right-hand corner, you can see a whale, which actually comes from I think a German or Dutch engraving from the 15th century. I'm sure it's in the archives in Harvard, but you've all probably seen it. So this was a drawing, or rather a painting of a whale that came out from there. But this image, The Streets Are Rising, the title of this work actually came out through a conversation with Saloni Mathur and Amir Mufti, who were in my studio in Karachi some years ago. And, you know, we were talking about the monsoon, actually, and how each time the rain, you know, the rains come and go, they have to keep raising the level of the road, and with the result that all the water always flows into the houses. And I'm sure many of you have experienced this. But the streets are rising also alluded to many other things that were happening on the streets in the public space in Karachi. And it alludes to the very sort of fraught political history of Karachi and the idea of displacement of settled communities, the frictions that were at work, the land mafia, the water mafia, and everything really that the city had to bear witness to. And I think this idea of witnessing is very important for me. We witness things, and we write HR reports, or you do actually. I don't. The lawyers do. Here's to the lawyers. But I think that the land also witnesses. So this has been something that's been becoming more important for me. How does the land witness something? How does the ocean witness something? And I realized that it was important because of some of the titles in my work. I haven't put that drawing in, but it is how we mark the land becomes part of its history. So, that kind of cyclical sense of marking the land, and kind of its memory, what becomes part of its memory. So in this image, actually, just to not talk too much here, but really to talk straight to the images, is a large work I made. I started making large format paintings around 2010-11, because I realized that what I was witnessing needed to be quite monumental, and I wanted these large works to feel like sort of history paintings almost in a European tradition sense. When you go to the Louvre, you witness Napoleon's, his crowning, or you witness other things. So I wanted to create these images which you could really walk into. And also the way that they were constructed was interesting because it wasn't very much a linear perspective. It was almost like a collage of walking experiences that I was sort of mining from the city and then bringing them into my work. And I don't work so much with setting up compositions through my laptop. So I work directly onto the canvas. So it takes a long time to resolve images, and it's a very slow process. But in this work, there were different things that had happened in the city, and you can see some of them. And so the way that I would create the narrative and include all of these quite disparate events across time and space was really to sort of pitch the skyline up to the top level of the canvas. And it was not really a formula, but I realized that was the way that I could create a sort of aerial perspective, but also a planar perspective. You're the architect. So you could see something like that, and then you could see something which was the horizon line. Thank you. I should move forward. So I think about my work as a walking practice. And walking also becomes a way to reclaim public space as a woman, I think, and in Karachi specifically, but also in other places, I'm sure. And I realized that, again, over the last 15 years, that I kept visiting the same sites, exploring the same streets, and, would find the neighborhoods change, evolve, become denser, find the island space more degraded, find more ruins in a space. And so those transformations have been recorded over time. And I think time plays an important role in my work in that sense. And it plays a very big role in the film that you'll see on Friday, Mapping Water. I don't want to talk too much about this work, except that I'm sure somebody might ask me later, what is the text? So I'll save that question and talk about this later. I'm just trying to move forward. So I think coming back to mapping and walking and thinking about the city, a lot of my early watercolor drawings were trying to grasp this notion of the water body, the monsoon, the city underwater. And, I created a series of works called Karachi Elegies, which sort of run parallel to Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities, and how, he kept returning to the city or an imagined city. And then I also thought maybe I'm a female Marco Polo walking through rather than, Kublai Khan slave or something. And then recent works of the city of Karachi again, much more recent. And, I was sharing with Vishal's students today how this new color has emerged in my work, which is this like a neon yellow, high-vis, hazardous sort of, it symbolizes that sense of danger. And I think this has been exciting for me because I've been working a lot on thinking about movement of refugees across bodies of water and how that body of water, becomes a kind of micro conflict zone in many regions. So I think, just lots of ideas really about, as I move forward through this work, about the Indian Ocean rim and beyond it, because really Karachi harbor faces the Arabian Sea, the Indian Ocean, and these are things that have been very important because for about a decade I worked in a small island called Manora, and again this 10-year journey became like a sentry post to ideas and concepts, and being at Goldsmiths in 2020. At the Center for Research Architecture, we had incredibly wonderful people coming in to speak to us, like A.L. Wiseman, Suzanne Shupley, Naeem Moineman, so many, Philippa Césaire. And I kept thinking that I've had a déjà vu when we were talking about some of the questions of borders and bodies of water. And I think that was because I'd kind of experienced certain things as I was working through Manora. Okay, two more works. This one is really one of my favorite, if I can say that. And it was the first painting in which this horizon line tipped up, and you had these different scales of the temple, Sri Varun Dev Mandir, and this playground in black, and then this little house, this souvenir that I would buy on the island made out of shells. So Manora was really a very multi-religious, it sort of talked about the multi-religious space that was India and Pakistan and the region before partition. So, that the whole, like the architectonic sort of structures in the island spoke to that history, and those were places that I visited a lot. And so this is another work, Looking and Looking Away, and this is really a more recent work, which again cites certain structures from the island, but then really is more poetic, I guess. I put this image in because I wanted you to see the interaction of people with my work recently at the Karachi Biennale, and I found that the curator had set up a lot of educational outreach with students, with different communities, and that was I came back thinking that I want to go back to painting. I want to go back to this material, which is medium, which is very slow and difficult sometimes to transport. But, there was this sense of these artists and students and everyone who visited with a sense of very strong connection to the work. And I felt very good about that. So I'm just 5 minutes behind my next bit, hopefully. So Monsoon versus Empire is really talking a little bit about where my headspace is right now and what my current concerns are. I was walking on Manora Beach once, and I realized, this was in 2019, that they'd put a they'd put a grill, a fence between the public road and the ocean. And there is actually a universal law which prohibits access of the natural world to citizens and people. And maybe someone can tell me a bit more about that. But this was interesting because I couldn't access the sea from where I would usually walk. So, I mean, this started a kind of thought process where I thought about, you know, what are the legal parameters of nature towards the construct of empire and colonialism. I mean, they're both very, very big terms, but this is what I'm thinking about and trying to unpack. But for, you know, just to put that on the side, I'd like to, share a few bits of work, which kind of touch upon ideas of the archive of weather and archives in general. Because, I, as Gina said, I work often in multiple mediums and simultaneously. And I just think I'm just trying to solve problems. You know, I paint something, I write some notes, I feel ambitious, and I start working on a large canvas, or, I realize the urgency of the moving image is something that was very important in the Venice Biennale, for example. I really wanted to show the moving image centered on the city in those films that were shown. So the archive and mapping in a very intuitive way, kind of conversations, sound, historical documents. A lot of this began again on the island, and there were conversations with urban scholars like Arif Hassan, Oshin Anwar, and all of them were narratives of different scales. So there would be big conversations with the fishermen community on the island, and conversations with urban scholars, and also conversations with the Navy chief on the island, because Manora is has a naval academy, and so the Commodore was very interested in the work I was doing, and the conversations we had were completely different. And of course, through this process, drawing was a really important part of my work also, because I realized that, of course we draw on paper in our studio, but then I felt like in retrospect, I was drawing with my body and traversing the island from one point to another, and then coming back again to the same points and finding that those points had changed, or the people had changed, conversations had changed. And I think, these linkages were very unscripted and unresolved between all of the stakeholders, but also the places that I was visiting. This is a small drawing from my notebooks about something I'm not sure if I made. So the archive, just very quickly, was this left-hand side image was a page from the Nautical Almanac. I found it in the Weather Observatory, and out of this sort of Marconi loop, I started storyboarding some ideas, because I felt that the image sort of called for a moving image response from my side, and there were lots of things. There were lots of dynamics. There was this sense of looking through a doorbin and a telescope. There was a sense of looking at the horizon line, but also inverting the horizon line, and this is the doorbin on Manora Beach, and that is the Sri Varun Dev Mandir. So this is a very, everyday space, people coming, non-elite, picnicking on the beach, and that was an image I shot from that time. So just coming back to this doorbin image, I think that there's a lot to say about this image and where it comes from. But I think one of the things that I felt the archive did, or using the archive, was really to upset the chronology of how elements and forms relate to each other in that original image with the ship and the little plane in the loop. You can see it on the left side. And I think that this sort of disruption allowed me to reimagine and to reclaim something from that kind of very fixed image from the almanac. And it also gave me a sort of a strategy to think about space and time, because, of course, I wanted to respond to the archive from the manual, because it was really, in a sense, a residue of colonial surveillance and control. And I wanted to kind of think about what is the counterpoint, what is my kind of critique into this structure. So I began to use images that I'd photographed, and I tried to think about, not just an optical device that was being twisted, but also a kind of physical one through the photographic images that I was constructing. And also, I think that through the archive, it just helped me mobilize something that needed to be, in a sense, untethered. It needed to be sort of set free. Okay, the whale again. Oh God. I just put this in to show you it's come back. But really, the Venice project looked at an archive of weather history from 1939. So it's funny. I'm here in Harvard, and I'm going to see some amazing archives this week. The MFA and the Harvard Museums, and I found this archive under all of that rubble and a lot of bird shit. In the observatory building in Manora. So I guess, I don't know if the point is there, but I think that it's interesting how sometimes we find these things in places we don't imagine. And sadly, more often than not, we find archives not in the best shape in Karachi. And so this manual of storms and cyclones in the Indian Ocean was really interesting, because it sort of talked about a social history rather than the weather. The detail, I'm sorry, I don't have the pages opened out, but the kind of classification of date, time, place, loss of revenue, loss of lives, loss of cattle, was all spatialized in these columns. So they're very straight columns, and you had a little bit of information against every date. And the detail, of course, was intense. So, you would hear about, you could read the crops that were lost, or the number of cattle that were killed, or birds that were killed. And that's where the title comes from, Hundreds of Birds Killed, which is one part of the Venice project. I'll sort of move forward and just show you the 11 maps that I excavated from. Well, I selected 11 cities, which were spread across South Asia. And I started to work to think about the maps of these cities as they were in 2019. So there were many layers of visualization, really, that produced to create these brass maps. And scale, again, was really important. I don't think you can see it in the images, but under every map, there's a scale along which I had to create the size and the relationship between the sizes, because, Kolkata and Lahore were huge. They would have been, larger than the space of this, of the floor here. And Siliguri and Mymensingh were very, very small. My mom was born in Mymensingh, in Chittagong. My mother-in-law used to go in the toy train in Siliguri. So there are lots of stories about every city, actually, in this weather report. And I've had some great conversations with people as they heard the soundscape that I created. Everybody had an emotional relationship to some city in this weather report from my family in Pakistan. I'll move forward to the soundscape of one of these. So there were 11 maps, and in a space on different plinths, sizes of plinths, and you had to navigate around the city. So you were kind of walking from one city to another. And at the same time, there was a sound piece, which was Nimra Bucha, who's a female actor, amazing actor from Pakistan, who was recounting the weather report. So it was a female South Asian voice recounting a 1939 weather report from British India. And, you know, we had fun doing this recording because I was thinking about Radio 4 audio dramas, and she was thinking about we were talking about the gendered voice of the South Asian, reading something like this and how gentle it should be or how soft or how hard it should be. But the sound...
Jakhora, Jhansi, and 20 neighboring villages. 31st January. Heavy hailstorm. 3 dead. The storm lasted for about 90 minutes. Many cattle and birds killed. Tanjibari and Sirajdigha Thanas of Munchiganj subdivision, Bengal. 14th February, afternoon. Heavy hailstorm. Hail fell for about an hour. The standing rain crops, vegetables, and mango sprouts were totally destroyed. Vikrampur and...
Okay. It's about maybe 18 minutes long. And then the soundscape engineer, we worked together to develop the sounds. And it was really interesting because the weather seemed to be blowing us away. It was sort of like a combative force within the way the narrative was being spoken and the way that it overlaid her voice, and her voice disappeared and then it emerged again. And then we, would cut the ambient sound of the cyclone, and then we would bring her voice up again. So it was amazing to have that in the space like this with the maps that you could walk around and walk with. The objects on the maps, the small objects were cast in brass in Karachi, and they were objects that I scavenged through secondhand markets, toy markets in the city. And I worked with a lovely family of brass casters in Golimar in North Karachi. And, I'd started working with them in 2008. So when it came to this project and I had a rather tight timeline, I took the project to them. I said, do you think, because I would have been quite happy to just keep the sound piece as the work, but, I felt like it would be exciting to show what we can do, show off a bit. And they really, really worked hard to help me produce these works and cast them in brass. And then, I worked with the soft files, which were engineered. I sort of call it a project between fast and slow technologies because, on one side, the excavation of the cities, on the other side, the casting, in which everything was lost sometimes. And some of the maps would, the liquid brass would bleed and distort the map itself. So the Indian Ocean and the monsoon. Again, there's so much written about this. Sunil Amrit writes in Unruly Waters about how the monsoon was something that British engineers and colonial administration were desperate to figure out, when is it going to hit? How much crops are we going to lose? Fiscal, everything was linked to, the production of crops. And so this idea comes back again of how, I think my work moves through this idea of thinking about the Indian Ocean body now a little bit more, and thinking about shipwrecks as sites of memory, and how we can imagine through the shipwreck a kind of historical, and how historical and future future intersects in this idea of salvage, and also really also the ocean currently in terms of thinking about marine urbanism and industrial waste, cables at the bottom of the seabed and the infrastructure of those huge cables. I won't talk too much about this because I'd really love to move forward, but you can see all this on the website. So yeah, the port cities is really where a lot of my imagination is moving through, but not just Karachi, but many port cities and infrastructures of ports, and what do they excavate and extract from the land. Also, new work which is centered around responses to company paintings. Again, that kind of geometry which was imposed in landscapes, whether it was the railways or fortresses. So just responding to excavating these geometries from company paintings, and then thinking about, again, really a thought experiment that do these geometries, how do I intervene in them? How do I play with them? And how do they become like the flat packs that were, created as much larger models of engineering infrastructures in the landscapes in India, in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka. I don't know if I've lost you there, but anyway, I'll move forward. I think that Mapping Water will be shown on Friday. So we'll show a 2-minute clip of that at the end. But, I think I have about 10 minutes. Do I have? Okay. I have 5 minutes. Okay. I knew I would do this. So the body in my work has been really important, and I keep forgetting that it constitutes about 20 years of my practice. And in many ways, I'm kind of coming back to ideas of the body and the politics of body, the politics of gender within the public space. I trained in drawing at the Ruskin, which was really very, quite traditional sort of process of learning. But drawing the female form in England was very different from drawing it in Pakistan, because it was a shift in the environment, the politics, the cultural issues that surrounded the female nude. These are some images in my studio in Karachi from some time back. And also the fact that I was, referencing works like Rembrandt's, like thinking about how the female form had been presented. So, you see some of Rembrandt's paintings, Henrike in the River, Susanna and the Elders, Bathsheba, Bilqis, in some of those reproductions between the large drawings. And I started drawing not the female nude, but the clothes, the attire, and thinking about how do the clothes, what do they talk about, what do they reveal. And so these works became, have been, this was kind of 10 years of drawing, which led to some of the works which I will end with. And I won't talk so much about these, but maybe some of these works, such as the Red Spine, the Spine, which is kind of a response to some of the kinds of clothing, the choli, which a friend of mine brought, a 2-piece choli. This is one part of it. which her grandmother used to wear with a ghagra. And, these sorts of pieces of clothing, in a sense, they guided me in how I was constructing these armor works, which were also scaled to the body. And I really started exploring clothing as a strategy to think about the emotional content of the body. So there were all kinds of objects like straitjackets, the night dress, and also thinking about heroism in South Asia specifically, because we hear a lot about Joan of Arc and Boadicea, but we don't really celebrate or think about the women in our homes, our mothers, our grandmothers, who kind of also have been very heroic in the way that they've managed their lives. So again, this work, which is the Rani of Jhansi, made with feathers and steel and suede, with spikes coming out of the feathers at the back, so that, there's this sense of danger and vulnerability, but also sensuality. I was looking at a lot of contemporary fashion as well, Alexander McQueen, Martin Margiela, Victor and Rolf, but also looking at traditional forms of clothing. And, this was a time of about 3-4 years where a lot of work came together. And I worked with a welder in Karachi called Qasim Bhai. And, that is another whole story, working with people, with a male artisan to produce this work is another film, perhaps, to make. And these are more recent works, a blue spine with leather and steel. And so really the relationship of the drawings and the objects and that kind of conceptual development all moved between making the object, doing a drawing, maybe drawing the object, reinventing an idea or thinking about it, and then processing it through the sculpture work, so that there were kind of many identities, many personas that were shifting through the work. I think we can stop, and it would be nice to just show 2 minutes or 1 minute of the film Mapping Water, so that we can end. Yes. Yeah.
September 2013, Amsterdam. At the Rijksmuseum, I'm looking at the clusters of Kraak porcelain and pepper found in the wreck of the Dutch East India Company vessel.
How does the ocean want to be represented? How did Hokusai look at the ocean as opposed to Caspar David Friedrich?
The sea under construction. The shipwreck is a process, a sort of agent of time and transformation. A kind of compression occurs. Memory-bound objects.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks. Where would you like me to sit?
Maybe in the center. Is that okay? What's the company?
Is it your right side is better or your left side?
Well, thank you so much, Liza. And just to plug in that Mapping Water, if you would like to watch the full film, actually Friday at 3:15 in Barco Center Thompson Room, we will do a screening. So do join us for that. And I'll mention it again at the end. But I think I know you two know each other. That's how we're gonna start. I know you two know each other, so you probably have a lot to say to each other. So
no, but don't let that stop you. Because I was replaying. I think we've known each other at least a decade,
yes.
And seen each other in many different contexts. But that should be no obstacle, I think, for anyone else jumping in with questions.
yeah,
And for you.
No, I wanted to see you two actually converse, and then we'll open it up to the audience questions. How's that?
That's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Let me also just say, and I hope that I'm not sounding obnoxious when I say this, but I had the privilege of seeing Mapping Water in Sharjah with Naiza after she had performed a work on the monsoon, which I don't think canon will be reproduced here and perhaps nowhere else. It's wonderful work, and it was really magical to see it in Sharjah. So I encourage you all to come and see Naiza in dialogue with Gina. Their conversation on water will be interesting. So Naiza, I guess maybe one way to begin the conversation is to think about the city, which has been so important to your work. And not just the city of Karachi as represented image, but a way of looking at the city, which has been so important for art in Pakistan, in South Asia, more broadly. I was struck by looking at, and I've seen them now a couple of times today, because I had the pleasure of attending Vishal's class this afternoon, the images that you made in Menorah or inspired by the Marconi telescope. And I was struck by the idea of the artist as a kind of Durbin wala. So there's a lot of writing that has emerged in and around Naiza's practice about the Durbin wala, which is the name for the man with a device, a viewing device that has been translated as binocular, telescope binocular. And then this afternoon, I learned that Naiza for some of the work, placed her camera in front of the Durbin, or this binocular telescope device that is available for the public to view, perhaps, a viewing public that comes to Menorah for a break from the city. And then they look back towards the city from the island, which is linked by a causeway. And so I was thinking about your practice as really, and I've written elsewhere about an artist that I think many of you will know, Mahmoud Pida Hussain, as a kind of bioscope wala, as an artist who worked across scales and mediums, and thought about the bioscope, which was actually very important to his early formation and out of which his interest in cinema developed. But it seems to me that you're often shifting scale and sight and moving across places to think about the city, whether you're working with artisans in Gulimar, with communities that have been displaced or will be displaced on Menorah Island and so on. So I was wondering if you might reflect on that.
Thanks, Sonal. Scale is very important, right? It's important to everything. And I think there was a small sketch I showed about the city expanding from maps which I'd found in Arif Hassan's archive, which were maps from 1830s onwards. And, he actually came to my studio and then he drew on top of those maps with a neon pen, which were I still have them. But it was really the sense of when you see a map, you see a scale. And I was kind of interested in how the city had grown, and scale would be very important because the map from 1838 would be something I could hold in my hands. And then the map from 2010 would be, huge. So that sense of realizing, acknowledging scale has been there. Yeah, with the Doorbeen, it's been more complex, and I only realized it because, you know, that image you saw of the storyboarding with the Marconi loop, you know, that was 2010. And since then I've been thinking, you know, how do I make this moving image work? Where, you know, and I had, you know, created some dummy experiments and things to do that. And I think, then I realized after making the film for Venice, which is titled Sticky Rice and Other Stories, and there are 2 parts to it. So it's a 4-channel installation, and 2 channels have one narrative, and then the next is another. And the second narrative is about the Doorbeen Wala. It's about the man with the telescope who actually was the person who would be on the beach. And he would be, you know, you'd give 30 rupees, you stand on the wooden step and look out into the ocean, and everyone could do it. It was not high tech. It's a vintage telescope, which is homemade. So the second film actually is about him and him cleaning the telescope. And I realized that, well, I mean, one thing is that after everything was done, I realized that the films were about, you know, stretching time and twisting space. And I kind of had done that in the thing, except that it wasn't in the format of the Marconi loop. So, I mean, but that aside, I think this sense of what the Doorbeen gives us is this near sight and this far sight. I mean, we stand in a particular place, in a moment, and we look at the horizon, we look at the ocean, we look at the vessels. And, you know, there's that kind of immediate sense of connection to something outside ourselves. So what I was trying to do was, you know, try and create a more complex sense of what are the counterpoints? How do I use this strategy or this structure to create counter narratives of what I received from the Nautical Almanac, you know, which basically had tons and tons of nautical, you know, like a diary, an almanac, but it also had the first 30 pages were all things that were being sold back to us by Empire. And this is 1969, 1966. So, you know, we were being sold cigarettes, we were being sold nautical equipment, life rafts, and also mapping equipment and archival space. So all our archives were also going back to Britain to be held over there, all our maps. This is like 20 years after independence. So, I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking about when I saw that archive. Now, what do I do with this as a, you know, in this moment to create that counter narrative and my position?
I would have said something like you're changing our sight lines constantly on the city.
Yeah.
But I think your description of your practice, stretching time, twisting space, is even better. That's a much better articulation of, I think, what happens in encounters with your work, because you aren't just restricted to a two-dimensional medium, and you are moving not only yourself, but the viewer across mediums in the practice. So here's another thing that I think would be important for this audience to hear that I certainly know about. It's no secret to anyone who works on South Asian art, perhaps to anyone in Pakistan, but that your engagements with the city have also been very much at the level of community in terms of your engagement with activists, your engagement with students as a teacher and mentor of young artists. You taught at the Indus Valley School. You were a founding member and you directed Vasal for many years. You have curated exhibitions in the city, which I will come to in a little bit. But can you tell us a little bit about that practice of being a citizen and building community in the city?
Yeah, I think it was a very chaotic time. So I'm glad I had some reflection on this these years of work. And it was chaotic because, you know, teaching, running an artist residency program and mentoring students and trying to make my work was tough with a young family. you kind of do whatever you can and the best you can. I think, community is very important for me because I think it's another dimension of practice for me in a sense. And I also think that, as an artist, we haven't talked about like interdisciplinary work, but that is also what I think an artist does. We create these transversal relationships between community, between scholars, between the imagination. What do we do with the imagination, that comes into my work. The Rising Tide, which was the curatorial project at the Mahatta Palace Museum, was in 2010. And I was looking at really the elasticity of the city as a framework. So I was really looking at practices that had engaged with urban space in some personal or more political or expansive way. So there were also architects in that exhibition who were doing conservation work. Then, there were about 44 artists, most of them living. So it was quite exciting to work with the living artists and, the kind of challenge of installing works. But also the work spanned looking at contemporary practices from 1990 to 2010. So this was a 20-year span. So it wasn't a survey show. And also it was marked by 9/11 in the middle of this, the spine of this. Not that that is the central, kind of point of reference, but it was important for all of us living in Pakistan. And to think about how practices changed and how people were impacted, how mobility was impacted. So this was very exciting. The Vasal Artist Collective, again, very important because it was an opportunity to empower artists rather than NGOs and institutions, and also to kind of take back some ownership and responsibility. So how do you want to run a workshop? Who do you want to invite? You don't have access to opportunities unless you know somebody. So I think it kind of helped to open up that space a bit, democratize access, and then of course our work with the region, with Khoj and the workshops in the region. Karachi is 45 minutes from Mumbai, but you wouldn't think that. We are miles apart, we are years apart in terms of our relationship and our memory to people there. So the Mobility Fund, which we had, gave access and mobility to artists to travel between, these 4 or 5 countries in the region. And of course, beyond, Africa as well as South America. So the Triangle Network is the overriding, umbrella organization, started by Anthony Caro and Robert Loader in 1983. I won't tell you more, I'll go into a rabbit hole now. But, these are some of the things. And I think, it was a bit crazy to try and juggle so many balls, but it's good.
And it's had an enormous impact, I think, on artistic practice, on artistic languages, on artistic communities, not just in Karachi or in South Asia, but I think even more broadly. I wanted to, I can't really plug it because I didn't have a chance to see this wonderful exhibition, The Rising Tide in Karachi in 2010, but I've read about it. And Jane Perlez refuted for the New York Times. What she wrote then was that violence was not an intended theme. I wanted the works to reflect the many strands of the urban condition, Ms. Khan said in her light-filled studio in an upscale neighborhood here. So that was, I think, a very important exhibition about contemporary with Hanging Fire at the Asia Society Museum in New York that put a spotlight on Pakistani art. I think the Asia Society show is often credited as being one that brought attention to the vibrant art world in Pakistan, to a global audience. But I think of The Rising Tide as at the Mahatta Palace Museum as no less important, certainly for artists working in Pakistan. On which subject I wanted to bring you to my most recent trip to Lahore in November when I had the pleasure and honor of attending the Lahore Biennale and its climate congress.
Yeah.
And I was hearing from curators, scholars, critics, Qudsiya Rahim among them, who's the executive director of the Lahore Biennale Foundation, that Pakistani art is having a moment. And she was saying this in part in response to a major exhibition of Pakistani art, a survey show at the national, I think it's the National Arts
Museum
Museums
in Doha.
of Doha
Yeah.
in Qatar, called Manzar, which seems to have been, an important exhibition to take stock of developments in Pakistani art. I think the time frame from the show is 1940s to the present.
That's right.
And it surveys art and architecture. Tell me what you think about, Pakistani art is having a moment with Manzar, with biennials kind of back to back in Karachi and Lahore in 2024.
I would stretch the word moment. I would reconsider that because I think this moment has been in longue durée. I set up my studio in 1990. So the 90s were a very exciting time of incubation of ideas and people working in Karachi in a very different way to Lahore. There was a lot of the sense of the city space being the space of how a lot of ideas and imagination was stretched. And of course, Lahore being such an important center of art education as well, and the kinds of practices that have evolved. So, right from that moment, there's a beautiful trajectory so that moment is a long moment, at least for me. And also from the early 2000s, artists becoming more ambitious, a little more patronage, a little more exposure. The obstacles have been so immense, it's been so tough, really. If you think about mobility of artists, I think about my time as a student, and even when I was at 17, my art history professor would say, "Okay, how many of you are going to Siena? Who's going to see the frescoes in Florence?" And we would study everything, and then we were told to go off and wander around and actually travel to those cities. So I think about artists in at Indus Valley School of Art or at NC in Lahore. How do you get a visa to get across to even Bombay or Delhi or to Dubai or anywhere? It's very tough. So throughout this time, all of this time, that's been one big obstacle. And then the other obstacle has been, travel advisories. How would you get curators across to come and see work being produced, artists working, sitting and having a meal with somebody on the road and chatting and sensing the road and understanding the environment and the context. And that's why bustle was so important, because artists would come, and a week before they would come, and of course for the Indian artists, I would work for 4 to 6 months to get the NOCs from the Interior Ministry, the Defense Ministry, the Foreign Ministry, and some other ministry, ministry of something else. Anyway, so, it was tough. It was tough to get that stamp for the Indian artists, but we worked really hard. So when they would come, they would always often message and say, Naiza, I've just read the travel advisory, and I would just say, look, just come, come and everything is okay, just come. And they would eventually arrive in Karachi, and they would ask me, where are the bombs? I can't hear any firing. Where's the Kalashnikov? Why are bombs exploding? It would take them 3 days to acclimatize to the fact that they could go to the bazaar, go to the restaurant, have some chai, hang out, have a beer, whatever, do whatever. Anyway, the thing is, coming back to this, what were we talking about? South Asia. So just the context of understanding a place was important. And I think Doha has been great. This longue durée, this is what we're talking about, is very important to understand that it's not just happened now. It's been years of hard work by scholars, artists, activists, writers, curators, people coming to speak, people showing what they've done and hopefully sharing other artists' work as well. I did a lecture series in 2011 across 5 different US campuses, Cornell and Berkeley and UCLA, UT Austin and Yale. And I was talking about the rising tide and, talking about the practices that have been emerging and are so powerful. So, I think the moment is here, definitely, but, it needs to grow with infrastructure and support. And I'm glad that Qatar Museums took this initiative. It's important. And of course, the biennales are fantastic because, you don't get a chance to measure yourself unless you measure yourself with people on the international platform. You never really understand how good you are until you can sit next to others who are just as good or bad as yourself, right? And that's why Venice was important for me and for Pakistan. And that's why the Lahore Biennale is important and Karachi, because, frankly, when people come and they make work and they show work and it's just all of these, really strong practices, you see that the artist who's chosen from, Okara or from Hyderabad or wherever they're based, the city or outside, their practice is just as powerful. This year at the Karachi Biennale, there was Tino Segal. And he never goes to any of his locations. He always instructs the team to do the performances. But I think the travel advisory scared the team from coming. So he decided, okay, man, I'm going to get there and sort this out. So he arrived in Karachi. This is what he told me. And he said, and he said, I was supposed to stay here for 1 week, but I'm here for a month because I love it so much. Oh. I mean, this is, you don't hear about these things. Or the Lahore Biennale, where, so many artists this time came from Southeast Asia and from Asia, and totally new faces, new people, and, some amazing artists who are at the top of their game. So this dialogue is very important. The dialogue with the world and to break the isolation that we've often faced. I mean, these are the obstacles. It's not just those little visa stamps, but it's the isolation that extends over long periods of time.
Well, thank you for that. I have to say that beyond the travel advisories, there are all of those fences and borders within. I'm thinking about, we talked a little bit about this earlier, Hajra Haider Karar's exhibition and essay about the high walls and closed gates of our cities in South Asia, and Manan Asif Ahmed's book, Disrupted City, about the difficulty but also the necessity of walking in our cities. So I think that there's many ways in which your work is speaking to many different artistic, political, intellectual concerns. Thank you for sharing your practice with us, for being here today. Gina, do you want to take over?
Yeah, no. So I guess I realize our announced program has we passed the time. So I'm gonna take maybe a couple of audience questions if it's okay with you. Absolutely. So yeah.
Show of hands if you have a question. If you have a statement, save it for later. But if you have a question, we'll take questions. All right, hands. Okay.
Mine is a very simple question. You showed the pictures of God Shiva as well as Varun Dev. Do you know how old they are and in which king built them?
No, I don't. Please tell me.
You didn't hear me?
She said no.
She doesn't know.
She doesn't
know.
Do you mean when was the structure built?
Yeah,
when was the mandir built? Sorry. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I think the date for the Sri Varun Dev Mandir is very contested, actually. It's said that, some people say it's 1,000 years old. Others say that it was built in the turn of the 20th century by a Hindu merchant who built it in around 1920. So there are different dates, actually.
Yeah, I was surprised to see the Varundev temple, but it actually makes sense to have a, ocean god to be
of course on the edge of the ocean. Yes.
Anyways.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask about the variety of media that you work in. I mean, your painting, drawing, watercolor, sculpture. How do those represent different eras? Is there a reason you go, and obviously film, what compels you to one versus another? Is it topic? Is it time? Is it, how do you explore that?
I imagine all artists work like this. I don't think it's unusual, but I think maybe they hide their watercolors or drawings. They don't show them so much, perhaps. I don't know. I think I showed a lot of paintings because I really wanted to, present some of the large oil paintings that I'm working on and that I continue to do. I think through different mediums. I was trained as a printmaker, and so I worked on small copper engravings, and then I worked on very large woodcuts, and then of course drawing. So, the mediums through printmaking are very diverse. And they have different sensibilities, and I think that kind of expands across for me in terms of, thinking about using watercolor when I have a quick idea to paint with, or sometimes I take a very long time with a watercolor or drawing. It's not about speed, really. I mean, some of those large drawings have taken 6 months, the Heavenly Ornament drawings, which are very large. And so, I think every medium has its specificity. It has a tone, it has a kind of emotional, it carries something different. And I think with Mapping Water, I worked with film more successfully this time because I'm not trained as a filmmaker. But I really enjoyed the fact that I could think about time as a mediator in the film, that sense of the paint drying, the map emerging, and how it settles on a page, and then the cities building up. I like to experiment. I like to move into things which I don't know, and it makes it exciting as an artist. Otherwise, you're kind of making the same work and repeating things a bit. And I come back to things a lot. I mean, as I said, I think. I come back to things to continue and find a different point of entry.
1 and 2, I think that will be the last.
Thank you. That was really fascinating, Naiza, and wonderful to see all this variety of work and all. So my question is actually, and you might have guessed because I'm from Karachi also, so because of the Manora project. You said you worked there for 10 years. And I was blown away by that. And how did you get permission to work there? Because it's a naval base. Yeah. And what was it that got you to, what was behind that project? What made you want to do that? What was behind that project? Yeah. If you could talk about that.
Thanks for that question. I didn't start it as a project, which would run for 10 years.
You took a walk.
I took a walk. Yeah, as I was telling Vishal and Sonal earlier today that, I found the city quite, ghettoized with the urban strife and, the way the energy was very intense. And I felt like I needed a space to walk in. And so I found that I took, there was an Italian art historian who came from Shanghai who I'd invited for Vassal. So I said, let's go and have a picnic in Manora. And so we went in 2007 and, with some other young artists. And, I just found the space to be really, really interesting. And there was a kind of porous nature of that space, which just allowed for me to get through from one point to another, which the city was not really enabling. So I went for a walk and, it was a long walk and I came back and then I went back the next week. So, over 10 years, I went very regularly to the island. I sat, I wrote, I talked to people, I photographed. Then I would come back like a fisherman with, like a net full of catch at the end of each day and felt really, really like there were so many ideas to process. And so it's continued, till recently. How did I get permission? The first many times when we are in a privileged space, there's a civilian port, then there's a naval jetty. Both jetties are there. And sometimes I would manage to find someone, again, was introduced to the Commodore, and he was very kind, and he said, he just, a few times I was picked up by the naval police also, with people, they would pick us up and ask us, what are you doing, So I found myself in a lot of tight spaces sometimes, actually. But then, once there was a cadet training exercise thing, and they were all running through this area, and I was in a naval area where they were casting these big pylons to build the deep sea jetty that the Chinese were building. Oops, sorry. And then they were running, and I was standing there with 2 cameras and lots of things hanging around my neck, and photographing, obviously, because these pylons were so interesting. There were these amazing sculptural forms, and they were literally running past me, and all of them were looking down because I'm a woman, and they were running with their shorts, and they didn't make eye contact, basically. And then one of them, who was in his cadet, uniform, with a gun and everything, came up to me and said, "What are you doing?" He was quite aggressive. And I had by that time taken out my sketchbook and a pencil, and I had drawn something, and I said, "I'm drawing, what are you doing?" "I'm drawing." And it just sort of, I guess I stayed under the radar, but then, of course, I had permission also. So I had a bit of access to just, not access in any big sense, but just to, I was invited back to the Naval Academy by the Commodore about 5 years into this walking and meandering around the place, because he said, I want them to see what you've done on the island. That was kind of a bizarre and interesting and amazing experience, because I walked into a hall with everybody in their white uniforms and white saris and white shoes and their hats, and they all stood up as I walked in with my grubby jeans and t-shirt. And, he said that here is an artist who knows Manora much better than all of you, and you need to learn something from her. So anyway, there's an interesting something to enact over there, something to talk about.
Just one last question. Yeah. I think if that's okay.
Fun stuff. Not everything was a naval police.
Yeah. Hello, assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much. It was great to hear so many different things in your work. Clearly, you have such a vast expanse of things that you've worked on. A lot of them comment on different social themes. So you mentioned stuff about gender. You mentioned reclaiming of public spaces, or even just walking. I think you were mentioning Manan Ahmed's book, Disrupting City, as well, and how you experience the city and art through the act of walking. And it brought to mind just a question that I wanted to ask you from your experience is, Pakistan is very divided along socioeconomic class lines. Even walking, for example, as an experience versus as a means of transport is something that is very class-based, right? So I might want to walk around to experience something, but I don't have to get from point A to point B by foot, which many people in cities like Lahore and Karachi do. And gender as well is a totally different experience if you're a woman from an upper class versus a woman from a working class. And a lot of us like to say, no, we're middle class. But I mean, let's be real, not compared to the majority of people in Pakistan. So I'm just curious to know how class differences have informed your work and how they showcase through your artistic experience.
I think that's a great question. Class comes up at every point, actually. And I feel very conscious of it because I know I'm coming from a very privileged position. And also, often able to cross certain lines because perhaps I know that I have a advantage or a privilege that, I won't really be, thrown in the cell for too long. Someone will rescue me. I don't know how much it comes out in the work. I can't say. But it's something that I increasingly feel in every public encounter and have always felt, and I feel it because of the conversations I have with people when I'm making work or when I'm walking somewhere. And I find more and more that those conversations are needing to be more center stage in my work. So I'll give you a small example. There's a film called Homage, which is on my website, and it was made in 2009. And it was a response to these 3 children who had died, sadly, because a wall had collapsed on them. And the wall of that school was, anyway, it should have been demolished years ago, but it wasn't. So it was a neglect on the authorities of that school, public school, government school. I had gone to so lots of things were made around this, lots of drawings and a lot of conversations. And then I went, I'd gone to the island to make some sort of intervention, to think about working with the community or working with people. And, I kind of felt like I'm in a bubble here again, because you're in a bubble when you're an artist, and in a position of privilege. So I had, so this led to a sort of performative work where I started painting the furniture of the school, which was thrown into a big pile. And I started painting it a certain color, which was the color of the tombstones in the cemetery on the island. So people started coming and helping and talking to me. So just a small example of something that came into the center was basically that the audio that is in that film is all the conversations happening in the periphery, that happened to be incidental, were not scripted, but they reveal so much, about somebody going off on a merchant ship, somebody's brother getting a job and going to Canada, somebody talking about the cost of living, they're all these unscripted, thoughts and comments. So I found each time I work with my community of artisans or I work, I find that more and more interesting work is happening on that periphery rather than the grand kind of commentary that I'm going to make or the ambitious work I'm going to make. So I feel very conscious of that, and I'm thinking about where that, when is it going to shift more?
Well, thank you. And I think we are kind of over time, so I'm going to, thank our artists.